Okay.
Welcome to our psychological health talk today. The topic of our talk today is, can you turn your stress into an advantage? Interesting question, since we have so many ways, so many messages that tell us that we have to get rid of our stress, we have to manage our stress. The question here today is, can you turn your stress into an advantage? So I want to start by asking a trick question. If you could, would you like to live a stress-free life? It's a trick question because the answer is not exactly. If you think that people enjoy not having stress, here's a challenge for you. Take a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, put them in the back seat of a car, and take a 2-hour drive. What will happen inevitably is the 2 backseat passengers will end up getting in a fight, causing you additional stress, which then you will try to limit their fighting, which will cause them additional stress. And it turns out that's more interesting than sitting in the backseat of a car with nothing to do for 2 hours. In fact, we regularly make an effort to create at least some stress in our lives. Here's an interesting thing that we find out as we go on. So in 1998, there was a study that was done by a psychologist by the name of Kelly McGonigal. She wrote about it in her book, 2015 book called The Upside of Stress. So in this book, she started with 30,000 adults in the US. And she asked a question. So the first question she asked is, how much stress did you experience in this past year? Then she asked a follow-up question. Do you believe stress is harmful to your health? 8 years later, she found those 30,000 people, and she looked at their experiences between 1998 and now 2006, 8 years later. And the first thing that she noticed was that those people who encountered in their life a lot of stress in the year prior to the beginning of the study had more health problems, greater mortality rates, all the things that we would expect when somebody is under a lot of stress. Here's what surprised her. When individuals answered that they did not believe that stress negatively affected their health, not only did they not have higher rates of mortality, higher rates of illness, they had lower rates of mortality and illness than those individuals in the study that started off by saying they had very little stress in the year prior to the study. In fact, the attitude towards stress was far more predictive of the outcome than whether or not that individual experienced stress. Now, this is an interesting finding, and one that doesn't match what we normally think, but let's take a look at it more carefully so that we can understand what's going on. So first of all, the truth is that stress has what's called an inverted U relationship. Very low stress situations, which we call boredom, are unpleasant for us. Very high stress situations in which we feel overwhelmed by what we have to do are also unpleasant. But there's a place in the middle where the stress in our lives matches the abilities in our lives, and in that time, we actually feel better if we have the right attitude. Now, this flies against something that I was taught when I was back in my graduate school studying psychology. And one of the things that we were taught at that time, that's true in a limited amount of circumstances, is behavior that's rewarded tends to happen again. Behavior that doesn't get rewarded eventually tends to be eliminated and what researchers would call extinguished. That works really well with laboratory rats in a maze in controlled conditions. It works somewhat in real life conditions, but it doesn't work all of the time. And here's where I began to question this. So in the aftermath of the attacks on our country in 2001, on 9/11/2001, our youngest sat my wife and I down and said, I've decided to join the Marines. And he made that decision. He joined the Marines. He was deployed to Iraq during the Iraq War. For a year, he guarded what was at that time the most dangerous road in the world. We're going to fast forward a little bit. And he got out of the Marines. He finished his ready reserve time, which is a period of time where you can be called up again if the country needs you, and finished his duties. And he became a police officer so that we wouldn't have to worry about him anymore. As I thought about his decisions, it occurred to me that this didn't fit the mold of if a behavior is rewarded, you're more likely to do it again. And in fact, on a number of different levels, if you want to join the military, the Marines are the hardest group to get into. They are the place where you are going to be challenged the most. You're going to be put in situations that are incredibly uncomfortable. And yet that was what he chose. Not only that, but because in his mind he's always been a person who saw himself as protecting other people, he chose to continue that career in law enforcement after he got out of the military. He was choosing to engage in stress in order to accomplish something that would be worthwhile to him. Turns out that this is something that all of us have done in our lives at some point or other, whether it's tackling a challenge to see if we can do it, whether it's getting into school and getting more education, whether it's joining the military and putting your life on the line for the country. We often choose to engage in things that are objectively stressful because it gives us a sense of purpose in our lives. It takes us to a level of ability that we want to discover in ourselves. And when we discover in ourselves, we want to repeat. This is different than giving somebody a treat because they finished a homework assignment. This is a very different level of human functioning that we see all the time, every day. So how do we do this? How do we create a situation in which we are able to do these kinds of things? Think of heroic people. Just for a moment, think of a person in your life that you would consider to be heroic, living or dead. Person that you know, person who's a historical figure. If you ask yourself, is this an individual who became heroic because everything went smoothly in their lives? they didn't have any really significant stress, that's never the person that we consider to be a heroic person. A heroic person is somebody who challenged themselves, who overcame adversity in the service of others to make a difference in this world. That mindset change is a change that brings us into a different place. So there are three important qualities that I'm going to talk about that help us to be able to get into a place where we are turning our stress into an advantage. The first one is to engage. So here's a quote from Vince Lombardi. I'm old enough, by the way, that I actually had a chance to see him coach when I was a child. So he says, "Gentlemen, we are going to relentlessly chase perfection, knowing full well we will not catch it, because nothing is perfect, but we're going to relentlessly chase it because in the process, we will catch excellence. I am not interested in being just good." So that first step into turning stress into an advantage involves engaging with something in this way. If you are looking at the stresses in your life and you take an approach of saying, I'm going to eliminate stressful situations, I'm going to remove stressful individuals from my life, I'm going to try to live my life without having challenges and stresses, what ends up happening is our life becomes smaller and smaller. And instead of avoiding stress, what we have done is we've created a different kind of stress that occurs on another level. If you were to say, I'm going to get rid of all the stress in my life, one of the things that happens naturally in our brains is that we have to keep checking. Is all my stress gone now? How about now? Now is my stress gone? And so I become stressed about whether I'm being stressed, because I have to keep checking to make sure that I'm still avoiding all that stress. The flip, the different way of thinking about it, is to engage. When we engage, what happens is that we now are actively dealing with the thing that's a challenge in our life, rather than avoiding it. Now, that doesn't mean that we passively accept that anybody can do anything to us that they want. In fact, that's not what Coach Lombardi is saying at all. He's saying in that engagement, what happens is that we become the actors in our life rather than the avoiders in our life. And by choosing to act, I move myself into a very different position. It is important to recognize, and I'm not saying that there's never a time to avoid something, but even there we want to do that in an active way. So if you're in a situation in which somebody is threatening you, you actively choose to move away rather than simply hope that that situation will stop, or try to never find yourself again in a situation like that. There's an activity, an engagement, a change in mindset that allows us to start that flip, turning stress from harmful into something advantageous. And many times we do this all the time in our lives. When I'm taking on a new challenge, when I'm trying something that will be a difficult thing to do, but I want to see if I can do it, I am engaging rather than avoiding. So, second issue. So, when we look at the research on stress that was done, we start with two big names in the early 1900s, right around the turn of the century. Hans Selye, who took the term from an engineering background, the stress on a piece of metal when you're trying to use it as a brace or things like that, and he applied it to human functioning. And then Walter Cannon, who actually is the one who coined the terms fight or flight, who looked at how human beings react to stress and determined that when a person is under stress, they either run away or fight depending on the situation that they're in. This research was built on for another 80 years, a little over 80 years. And there's a quirk of the research that occurred during that time. So it's not a surprise that in the early years they went to universities to do that research and then gradually expanded it. But in the early to mid 80s, there was a researcher at UCLA by the name of Shelley Taylor. She asked an interesting question. She went back in the research and she asked, I wonder how many women were present as part of, as research studies in the research that was done on stress from the 1900s till now. And the answer that she got was 0. There were 0 women, there were no women included in any of the stress studies from 1900 to the early 1980s. And she wondered, is it possible that women have a different stress response than men have? And she went out to determine whether that was the case. Part of her research uncovered another approach to dealing with stress, which she described as something she saw much more frequently in females. And she coined the term tend or befriend. Now think about it. Our ancestors were roving tribes. It took a long time for human beings to settle in one place. We were nomadic in our origins, and so as a tribe, the group would be moving from place to place. As they did that, we believe primarily on the savannas of Africa, they would set up camp, and in order for the tribe to be safe, they had to determine whether there were nearby belligerent tribes, whether there were predators in the area, whether there was prey so that they could eat. In that situation, the men of the tribe formed kind of an outer barrier so that the women and children could be protected. In that outer barrier, their responses: fight if there's a predator or prey that is necessary for them to be able to eat, fight or flee, depending on whether they felt like they were outnumbered or the predator was too strong or whatever. So men easily developed that strategy of fight or flight as a way to protect the tribe. At the same time, when there was danger, the women would gather all of the children of the tribe into one place. And in order to keep them safe, they had to talk with each other, make sure that all of the children were accounted for, make sure that everybody was taken care of. They had to tend to the children's needs and the needs of others, and so their response to stress was quite different than the male response was to those early tribes. As our societies grew and changed and became more complex, there's a lot of overlap. It isn't that only females only do tend and befriend, and males only do fight or flight, but there still is a tendency to recognize that there are other ways to manage a stressful situation besides a fight or flight response. And in fact, when we look physiologically, we function physiologically the best when we are in social interactions during times when we are challenged. That social interaction gives us resources and abilities that we wouldn't have if we were trying to manage everything as solo actors. Human beings' ability to survive and become a dominant species is based almost entirely on our ability to collaborate and cooperate with each other. Because when we do that, we are able to do far more than we would ever be able to do on our own. And that means that even gathering together in groups causes us to want to engage more and rather than avoid more, which ties in with that first element and allows us to be able to function at a much higher level. The third quality, an equally important one, is that when we are engaged in this approach to stress, it gives us the opportunity to grow. Now, in our first talk, when I was talking about the stress management in the real world, we talked about a growth mindset, and you can review that talk on our YouTube channel if you are so inclined. But that growth mindset has as its underpinnings an interesting dimension of our physiology. So it turns out that the way we make our muscles functional is to use them and challenge them and stress them to the point where as those muscles recover, they not only return to where they were before, but they add a little strength to be ready for the next challenge. So if you go into the gym and you're exercising, whether you're doing cardio exercises or resistance training, what you're doing is you're tearing down your muscles just a little bit, causing the muscles to be strained to the point where some of the fibers are strained to the point where they break. In the rest period that follows that exercise, the body starts to repair itself. It repairs itself and adds a little extra to make it stronger so that the next time it's strained in that way, it will have the strength to survive and thrive in that situation. And so over time, we build stamina, we build muscle by intentionally stressing our muscular system. It appears that we do the same thing on a cognitive level. So when I want to learn and be able to get smarter, get able to manage more complex tasks, one of the things that I need to do is push myself to the point where I am right at that edge where I don't know what I am trying to do in order to be able to make that effort to try to get past that gap and learn more. I amuse myself sometimes by reminding myself that I've never learned anything when I thought I already knew. So one of the keys to growing smarter is to be willing to tolerate that place where things are uncertain, where I am beyond what my normal ability would be, and I'm pushing myself to think harder, work harder, learn from my mistakes, and push myself beyond my limits. This might be true also in our immune system. When our immune system is dealing with a virus or a bacteria, and that virus or bacteria is relatively mild and doesn't overwhelm our system, perhaps our immune system is not only responding to it, but it's strengthening itself so that in similar conditions, it will be able to meet and overwhelm whatever foreign invader in order to keep our bodies healthy. And that actually is the theory behind having a vaccine. A vaccine challenges the immune system. The immune system, in reaction to that, grows and becomes stronger. Well, why wouldn't that happen in these kinds of situations too? So you're in a situation that you find stressful, you're willing to engage, you are collaborating with others, and you push yourself right up to the place where, in order to manage this new challenge, you have to extend yourself beyond your comfort zone. Now that has an interesting implication, because it means that if we're always comfortable, then we're not as able to develop the ability to manage stress as if we're willing to sometimes put ourselves in situations that are a little bit beyond our comfort zone and push ourselves to do things that are uncomfortable in order to be able to do them better the next time, and over time be able to do it better and better and better. Those are the kinds of things that allow us to turn stress into an advantage. Now there's a lot more that you could learn, and I would recommend the book by Kelly McGonigal, The Upside of Stress, as at least one of the books that you might read that would help to give you much more detail about all of this. So this is our first 4 weeks of our psychological health talks. In the next four weeks, I am going to focus a little bit more on something that is very personal to me. So back in 2007, I wrote a book called The Prevention of Depression. And over the next 4 weeks, in our psychological health talks, we'll be looking at how that book was put together, and I'll be sharing the insights that I tried to share with my audience when I wrote that book. I'll also be talking about some of the things I've learned since then that have built upon what I put into the book, and a few places where I would even maybe make a few changes from then till now. And that will be the subject of our talks as we are going forward. These talks are weekly, each Wednesday morning. They will be available on our YouTube channel, the Stress Management Clinic YouTube channel, and you can find them there, or you can subscribe so that you'll be alerted when there's a new talk, but it will allow you to continue to engage with our talks. So that's it for today, and I will see you again next week. Thanks.